when we talk about corruption, we need to investigate. We need to actually track certain people that are under suspicion of the investigating team or the ACB or any relevant government sectors as well. So for Brunei Darussalam, it's quite inconsistent, simply because COVID-19 has caused a lot of major setbacks and problems and drawbacks to what the investigating team might do, and also the prosecuting chamber as well under the Criminal Justice Division of the AGC Brunei Darussalam. So conclusively, is it effective? Based on the clauses, it is, but it depends on the situation and the initiative and effort made by the relevant individuals at hand. So that's my answer for the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ruzain. How about you, Ansa?
Okay, so in Malaysia itself, again, that I mentioned NACP and MACC, are they effective? I think it would be a really effective organization itself if the government or any of the public service offices are not put inside the MACC or NACP to basically does the check and balance. So this, if the government officials or the public servants are not put, they're not actually inside the NACP and MACC, I think it'll be a really effective commission to actually does check and balance for in terms of corruption. Because MACC itself for the past 2 years, they strongly believe that the country has showed a very notable and prominent progress in terms of battling against corruption within the past few years. However, the MACC commissioner has basically said that the initiation of NACP over 2 years ago when they were created, a corrupted free nation, it has served as a platform for the government to review the current anti-corruption law, regulations, and procedures in order to advocate and implement law reforms and to revamp the existing anti-corruption framework effectively. And so if you were to ask again, is it effective? I think in terms of MACC and NACP, I think they're very highly likely effective. This is because the corporate liability provision known as the Section 17A of the MACC 2009 Act, which was approved by both houses of the parliament and came into effect in June 2020. It basically, how it works is that it enables MACC to directly impose a corporate liability on commercial organization whose employees or associated persons were involved in corrupt practice for the benefit of the commercial organization. So as a consequence of this, MACC made a milestone and it has shown a notable progress in terms of battling against corruption, and it is very effective according to the data shown for the past years. So MACC basically through the past years, with many pressing charges on an offshore vessel support company for the first time under the Act in criminal court, their investigation has shown that that a former director, MACC in resolving issues on corruption has been very effective, and it is actually and it's a good system for you to implement to combat corruption. Alongside with that, MACC undertakes its function and mandate seriously and in upholding the rule of law. So again, it goes back to if MACC and NACP provides a really good implementation on the law reforms, I think it'll be a very effective committee to basically combat the current issue that is going around with corruption. So that's it from my end. Over to the answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. For me, the government regulation to determine the running of country, especially on the issues of the corruption, which the government regulation are very important in the regulating matter related to corruption, such as punishment. So the government regulation are as effective as possible to solve problem in a country. Okay, for the next question, we have discussed the corruption in detail. Then, what do you think is the biggest obstacle in eradicating corruption itself? What do you think is the biggest obstacle in eradicating corruption itself? For Ruzain?
Okay, thank you so much. I've said this continuously, but I'll just add on. So one of the, I would say, obstacle, like I said, is whether how much restriction does the government give to the officials and authorities. But I would say that it's a restriction basically. That's the obstacle at hand. So in order to actually jump over the restriction, I think we have to solely depend on the CJD, or the Criminal Justice Division, as I've stated earlier on, of the Attorney General's chambers, because of their high qualification and certainty. But if you were to look upon the individuals, there's not really much we can do, as I've stated earlier on. So that's the only answer I can give. But to add on, in order to actually jump over, or to find a way to bypass that restriction, I would say I have to solely hope the cooperation and the close ties between the prosecutors of the ACG and the Anti-Corruption Bureau, simply because of their technicalities and their mandates of what they are able to do in terms of tackling corruption. And they have to provide avenues for these investigating officers, because when you want to investigate certain cases or certain individuals, it requires a lot of time and money as well on a frequent basis. And these dialogues between the prosecutors and also the ACB must be implemented on the basis that it enables both parties to discuss issues pertaining to the investigation itself and the prosecution of corruption cases, and to explain of the courts of Brunei Darussalam, so that when we move forward in time, both the ACB and also the prosecutors can learn and develop from these issues and have certain remarks by the courts. And the integration of IT as well, whether or not the current ACB and also the ACG have the sufficient IT technology to determine and detect the individuals that is caught of having corruption, or is in suspicion of having corruption. Because IT forensic technology, for instance, they have enabled the extraction of data and information pertaining to the corruption activities. Because we can talk about, let's say, the P2P encryption. If the corruption, if the corruptor or under suspect were to use, let's say, VPN to bypass the internet IP address, that can be quite a challenge. Or if they were to use Tor, so that itself is quite a challenge. So IT forensic technology has such a major impact. So the restrictions by the government, and also initiative, certain conditions, and the understanding of usage of IT forensic technology can actually have an impact on the obstacle at hand and to ensure effectiveness. So this advancement communication technology has made it possible for the location of tracking of corrupt individuals, because we don't really know what other new technology might emerge in the future, because as we pass by on, the technologies are getting more complicated. So therefore, having update on this usage of perhaps software, it's quite important to understand how it works, especially the subcomponents of the technology themselves. So that will be my answer. And lastly is the international cooperation. Under pretenses, or on the instance that the ACB or the ACG does not have much technicalities on a corruption case, then it is important to have international cooperation. So we can do the Criminal Asset Recovery Order of 2012, or the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Order 2005, because these corruptors can actually not just be in Brunei, but they can perhaps go overseas as well if they were to be caught at hand, if they knew they were under suspect of the corruption cases. So these are the most important effective measures, because the close network between these international cooperation between the prosecutors and the international counterparts is that it provides a platform for the expeditious processing and identification of international requests through both formal and informal channels. And with the IMLA, or the International Mutual Assistance Request, the international cooperation can actually speed up the process for the request of assistance. So that is one way. Uh, that's one of the ways for me to actually tackle these obstacles. So I'm actually having another answer to a non-existence existence question. But yes, those are the, I would say, the number of methods to bypass or to overcome those obstacles at hand, because Brunei Darussalam is not as much advanced or a front or a forefront in these type of case in comparison with other countries. So that's my answer to the question. I'll pass the floor back to the MC. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ruzain. How about you, Aneesa? Hello, Aneesa, can you hear me, please?
Yeah. Okay, so how to eradicate corruption itself? It starts from the high above. So it starts from the government itself to eradicate. I mean, sure, we can, the youth can obviously advocate, constantly advocating on the issue of corruption. But again, it comes up all the way from the higher authority in eliminating corruption, because government are the ones who makes law, legislature are the one who pass law. So from there, we can tell that it is only effective if it was to start from the government itself all the way down to the people in the public officials to actually eradicate corruption. Again, corruption has been a very prevalent issue, and it's a very big issue that has been happening not just in Malaysia or Indonesia or any other country within Southeast Asia. I'm sure it's a very big issue all around the globe itself. Again, Malaysia has been trying many different initiatives and to basically to reduce the deterioration of the government's image itself. So when the corruption itself, when the government tries to eradicate corruption itself, it could possibly impact the investors. And if they were to implement it properly, I think the investors and the people doing the business in the country would likely be more attracted in investing in the country. So in the recent years, again, Malaysian government is jarred from a multi-billion-dollar global corruption that has been going all around the globe. Again, based on the results of the investigation made by the MACC and the NACP, the company has sent money several times to the personal bank account of some of the government officials. So again, back in 2018, when the opposition government came into force and they were elected as the current the 2018 government, they have basically strongly enforced that eradicating corruption would be somewhat highly effective if they were to start it from they themselves, the government. And again, one of the preemptive steps that should be implemented by the government is to tighten the cooperation procedure with private companies to prevent practices of bribery between the private sector and the government. So this way, the first step taken by the MACC was the amendment that I told you before. It was the MACC Act 2018. And it was introduced in Section 78 of the MACC Act 2009. This is basically a provision that specifically imposes liability on a commercial organization for corruption when it's committed by associated persons. So this provision demands every top-level management of a company to fully comply with applicable laws and regulatory requirements on anti-corruption. So this way, again, I think government itself plays a major role in eradicating corruption, as sure MACC and NACP or any other independent institution or independent commission can eradicate a corruption, but it has to start from the legislature and executive themselves. This is because when they don't show a good example, what more in asking the youth to follow whatever the activities on eradicating bribery. So yeah, that's it from my end. Over to the MC.
Okay, thanks so much. For me, obstacles in eradicating corruption are indeed quite complex, but if citizens are aware that corruption is a wrong act, then corruption will not be carried out, of course. Okay. In Indonesia, the problem of corruption is no longer a personal problem and has even become a public problem. In Indonesia, the number of corruption crimes that institution as per October 2021, the Corruption Eradication Commission noted that there were 71 corruption cases during January until October 2021. The majority of the corruption crimes were carried out in district or city government agencies, 46 cases. So, before this, even I have researched on corruption in several countries, especially in the countries of all speakers. And here I want to know your opinion about the news I quoted on the internet about corruption. Okay, for Ruzain.
Sorry, Sylvia. Can you repeat again your question? I can't quite understand it. Thank you.
Okay. I will get my question. Okay. The news about corruption in Brunei. The news I quoted mentioned that corruption in Brunei increased in inequality, reduced political response, and thus produce increased difficulties among citizens. How about your response?
My response to that recent news regarding the increase of corruption, is that what you're asking?
Yes, of course.
Okay, regarding that, okay, so I would like to actually have a case that I've read in the news. I think it was either early this year or last year. So a total of $200,000 were embezzled on one of the oil and gas companies in Brunei Darussalam. I believe it was BSP or Brunei Petroleum. But fortunately, that person was caught. But let's say that they weren't caught, I think it would have resulted in a lot of losses. So I would say that my response to that is that regarding the rise in corruption case in Brunei Darussalam is that um, like I said, it depends on the authority and government as well. Because when there is a proper monitoring system or an undercover individual in each relevant department, it would be easier as opposed to just investigating contextually. Because for me, although I'm not really a relevant individual to the government since I'm just a student under a college. I would say that just based on my basic comprehension of the idea of what corruption is about, monitoring systems and the compliance of laws are actually quite vital because cases reflects the capacity of our governance and our ability to actually be compliant to these regulations, and it actually defines whether or not our jurisdiction is effective. Because yes, policy making collectively is very vital and crucial, but compliance as is also important as well alone. Because when there's lack of compliance, be it uh, the jurisdiction is comprehensive and substantive as it is, when there's lack of compliance, then the cases that is present will reflect. So my response to that is I'm quite disappointed to hear, but like I said, I can't do as much because recalling back to my previous statement, the biggest thing, or given the platform that the ACB or the Anti-Corruption Bureau can do, is actually provide talks. Talks are vital in the aspect of disseminating certain informations of what corruption is about, just for the public to have a general idea and understanding what corruption is or the concept of that term as it is. But ultimately, it depends on the relevant authorities. So this can be reflected back and forth, and both are actually congruent towards one another. And I hope that for me as a citizen, one day that this can be tackled properly. And I hope that I can be involved in certain projects because when you are a nation under the ruling of a monarchy family, it's quite challenging because I'm sorry, I have to say this. The royal family themselves are quite corrupted. Apologies. That's why I think that there's just a lot of misses in the monitoring system because we do have abundant or sufficient amount of money, but it is not allocated properly, leading to the lack of sufficient budget in certain areas. So that's why there are these cases, but not just local cases. There are still cases where there involves international involvement as well, especially when you talk about companies or supply chains, or when there is suspicion and the data balance sheet, right? So I would say that if we were to adopt the UNCAC and measure the effectiveness yearly, then we would know that there will be less cases because monitoring systems are very vital to have an idea of what is happening around us. And I believe that personally for me, having an undercover agent in each department, especially government sector, is quite important because there's a lot of cases not on paper. They don't do that not on paper. It's just mouth to mouth because if it's regarding the government, there's not really much going on, unfortunately. But there's lots of cases that I've heard is that the fundings are not used properly. That's why certain things are not really done well. And I would say that being the king, with the amount of money that His Majesty has, there's a lot of things that can be done, that can be executed. But since there was lack of monitoring or just lack of, uh, I would say, reminder, it was quite prominent. And as it is, as you've said, the cases are getting higher. It's just that what are we focusing on as of now? Although there's COVID-19 and other variants as well, there are still other cases and areas that is in need of proper clarification and proper monitoring, because we just can't be too imbalanced in our focuses, because if we were to focus on one thing, it will affect the entirety of certain, uh, I would say, certain areas of problems, in this case corruption. So I know that my answer is quite long and it jumps to different sectors, into different areas of what I think, but it's just really relevant to defining why there's higher cases at this point. So that will be my answer to that question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ruzain, for your answer. And the next question for Aneesa. The news is in the admarket.com news on 25 November 2020 that around 71% Malaysians think that the government corruption is a big problem, with parliament, police, and government officials ranking the highest of perception of corruption among the public institutions. How about your response?
Sorry, can you repeat back your question?
Okay. In the admarket.com news on 25 November 2020 that around 71% Malaysians think that government corruption is a big problem, with parliament, police, and government officials ranking that the highest of perception of corruption among public institutions. How about your response?
Okay. Again, how is government corruption in Malaysia like? If you were to ask me, and how is my perception towards it? Again, I was never really strong on corruption, and I think that corruption is basically using taxpayers' money. Corruption was never purely from the government's money itself, and so political corruption doesn't benefit everyone as a whole. It only benefits a certain individual or a certain businesses for their own private gains, for their own personal gains. And so for a corruption itself, when there is such thing, that corruption doesn't necessarily has to be in a form of cash or money. It could be in a form where any free gift could be construed as a scheme to lure the recipient towards some biases. So in some cases that the gift is seen as an intention to seek certain favors, such as work promotion and tipping in order to win a contract, job, or exemption from a certain task. In the case of junior worker handling in the gift to a senior employees. So government corruption in Malaysia, again, has been really bad, and that I'm sure that everyone is aware. Again, after 50 over years that Malaysia has gained independence, it has only been one single dominant party who has been ruling the government, and no other party has ever ruled the government ever since. So in my personal opinion itself, how can we make sure that the youth is aware that the corruption isn't bad? Again, it's through policy making. And how can we implement policy making? It's through the higher officials. So again, when there is such thing as criminal breach of trust, if there was any suspected case within the cabinet ministers or government officials that are that have committed CBT, criminal breach of trust, they should be charged and they should be brought to the judiciary for the court to evaluate it themselves. This shows that with the court and the judiciary basically giving out and setting out a certain legal guidelines, this will show that corruption isn't actually really good, and that whenever you commit corruption or you commit to CBT, there'll be a very bad consequences leading to it. So again, I think that the youth, I think in terms of awareness, what the youth can basically learn, it's through infographics on social media. I think it'll play a really huge role if the government, the youth itself was to learn corruption, they were to go through social media and basically learn anything about corruption, that the government hasn't really been very transparent and clear about the information given out to the public. So yeah, I think that's it from my end. Over to the MC.
Well, thank you so much for all speakers here, for your time, and all the participants in this talk show. Our time is up. It doesn't feel this fast. Okay, from the discussion, I can conclude that corruption is a problem that has been found in many countries. The government role is very important in eradicating corruption and citizen awareness is also needed so that corruption can be stopped. Corruption has a wide impact, both in economic and social culture. For that, we as young people need to instill awareness from now to stay away from corruption because it will only damage our country. Okay, for all speakers, Ruzain and Aneesa, maybe you can give some message to the organizer or your impression of being a speaker. Ruzain first.
Sorry, what was the question again?
Okay, you can give message to the organizer or your impression of being a speaker.
Okay, thank you. So first and foremost, I would like to thank the organizer for giving a platform for youth such as myself and others to talk about the issue, a social issue, which is corruption in this case, because for me, being from Brunei Darussalam, there is lack of opportunities. So my initiative is always based on international programs and conferences. So being invited as a speaker in this case is quite a golden opportunity. Uh, and for me, despite being a petroleum engineering student, I am also interested in international affairs and global issues. So having to be speaker would actually widen my insight on such cases. And conclusively, terima kasih banyak-banyak, and I hope to have more opportunity to be speaker or just to participate in discussions as well, because every time there's a discussion, it requires research, and when there's research, we have more clarity and understanding in certain topics as well. And being aware is important because when there is ignorance, it's not going to forefront and progress collectively for a nation. So thank you so much, and I'll pass back the floor to the MC.
Okay, how about you, Aneesa? What is message or your impression of being a speaker in this talk show?
Again, thank you so much for the invite and as inviting me as the guest speaker. I'm truly honored to have spoken about corruption, as I think as a person who is in a political party in Malaysia, I do think that corruption has been a really prevalent and a big issue in Malaysia. So thank you so much for highlighting and emphasizing on this issue, and I hope that all the speakers here are basically aware of how bad the corruption is, not just in our specific country, but all over the globe. Again, thank you so much for having this call. I hope that I get to see each and every one of you, maybe someday physically. Makasih again, thank you. Hopefully I can keep in touch. Thank you so much, guys.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, previously I closed today's talk show session. There are some certificates to all outstanding speakers. Maybe the operator can share screen the certificate. The first certificate to Ruzain first.
Di skip aja kalau saya.
Operator, maybe can share screen the certificate. Oh, Okay. Okay. Maybe the certificate will send by email or by WhatsApp to all speakers here. Okay. Okay, for the next is maybe the operator can take position with all participants in this talk show. All the participants can turn on camera. Okay, I will count until 3. The operator can take screenshot. Okay, I will count. 1, 2, 3. Again. 1, 2, 3. And the last game, I will count. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much. I think that's all enough for today's talk show. Thank you so much for Ruzain and Aneesa for your time today. I'm Silvi Sitaviana as an MC today. Sorry if there's many mistakes. See you at another event. And wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, everyone.